Welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed Khan. Today we're talking about the open letter that was written by the Taliban to Mr. Donald Trump, the President of the US. And along with that, we will also discuss Kashmir, because that is a burning issue for Pakistanis and Kashmiris, and of course the Indians also. So we'll talk about these things. Let me introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me today, we have Dr. Riffat Hussain, and along with him, we have General Talat Masood. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you so much.
So let's start with the open letter of the Taliban to Mr. Trump. How seriously do you think the US administration or Mr. Trump is going to be taking that letter to begin with?
Well, they have to take it seriously because that's the first official communication ever since President Trump took over about 6 or 7 months ago. And the Taliban and the situation in Afghanistan is getting out of hand. Repeatedly, American administration officials, including the U.S. Defense Secretary, have said that that they are no longer sure of whether they will be able to gain victories in Afghanistan. If victory means retaining a certain presence for any length of time, and the review the Afghan strategy review has been in place, which is to be announced shortly. So it's in that context that the Taliban have made a significant offer to the U.S. administration not to hand over Afghanistan to the military. What the fear are, the rumors are, that the Arab prince, who is the Blackwater fame,
the CEO of Blackwater.
So there is a plan which is under consideration that the Americans are going to privatize the war, and they would let the special forces headed by Arab prince do the dirty work for them. So which means that these people will not be respectful towards even the modicum of existing humanitarian law rules, and they will try to play havoc. So the Taliban are thinking that if that is the future that awaits them, so they would like to avoid that. Hence the appeal to the American moral conscience. There is a mention of the the U.S. young kids. They were getting killed in Afghanistan, and the casualty figure of the American intervention in Afghanistan has nearly reached the 3,000 level, the number of people that were killed in the 9/11 attacks. So I think they see an opening. This also suggests that the Taliban are looking for an opportunity to seek some kind of a settlement with the Trump government. And they, interestingly, the reference that I saw in that letter was that they are looking at the Trump administration as the responsible government, and which is cognizant of the fact, and they are saying that you have spent billions of dollars, and you have paid such a heavy price, and yet victory is no longer in sight. So I think it's a serious offer, and the Trump administration, instead of sending more troops or sending more special forces, should seriously look at the offer.
Complete withdrawal. Because that's what the Taliban have said, the Afghan Taliban. General Saab, a very good point was raised by Dr. Riffat, and that was the definition of U.S. victory in Afghanistan. What does it really mean? We have heard remarks in the American government saying that they are not winning in Afghanistan, and President Trump would very much like to do that. But what exactly does that mean? Does that mean occupying Afghanistan till kingdom come? Is that the victory that they're looking for? Or are they looking for a political solution to the Afghan conundrum that will allow the American troops to be going home? So what exactly does victory mean?
I think victory in the present context means a certain level of stability in Afghanistan, and a sort of a decent withdrawal from Afghanistan. And because they have been there for the last 16 years, and they would like to leave with some level of respect from Afghanistan. So I think these are some of the minimum elements that they would need in order to leave Afghanistan. And I would say that as far as that letter is concerned, which has been very well defined by Professor Riffat. I think the real point is that the Taliban know that the power lies with the Americans, and they have to deal with the Americans. So they are really saying that it is you who are going to really determine the future of Afghanistan, at least in the present context. And this government is only there because
it's a puppet government.
You are supporting it. It may have a certain level of support, but that does not allow it to sort of sustain itself. So what really is needed now for you to understand that we are also now looking for a political solution. This is exactly what Dr. Riffat has been also implying.
But previously also, sir, there have been some contacts between the Taliban and the American government.
Yes,
there were a number of these steps, but they all were aborted, or abortive attempts towards trying to find some kind of a rapprochement between the Afghan Taliban, the government, and the Americans. Why is it that all these efforts have been aborted and nothing serious has ever come out of them?
Because the main reason, in my judgment, is that the Americans were suffering from this delusion that one day peace will prevail in Afghanistan on American terms. As the time goes by, they realize that it is no longer possible for them to even stay in Afghanistan for another 10 years or for another 15 years. So the American strategy is that they would like to leave Afghanistan with peace, with honor, and the definition of honor is not acceptable to the Afghan, because the Afghans are saying, the Taliban are saying that you have to, at some point you have to talk about the complete withdrawal of all American forces. So short of that goal, and the Americans are not willing to do that, because not only their credibility is at stake, but they think that that they can prolong their stay in Afghanistan for another 5 or 10 years, and it will send a clear message to the Taliban that the military victory for either side is not possible. So Americans can wait for that stalemate situation to arise, but there is a growing sense of unease at the level of the American public opinion, because the people are thinking that, look, we have spent at least $100 billion in Afghanistan, and what we have got, nothing but chaos, violence, and more instability. So the Taliban are saying that this is the right moment for them. They may not be able to push the Americans out of, they may not be able to force the Americans out of Afghanistan militarily, but they will make it costlier for them to stay in Afghanistan on their terms. So that I think is the calculation behind the Taliban mind.
And also maybe the crux of the matter of that letter, because they put a lot of emphasis on the amount of money that has been wasted in Afghanistan by the American taxpayers, and that was one of the things that they appealed towards, because Mr. Trump is a businessman and he keeps talking about local jobs, and money seems to be what makes the mayor go. So maybe that is the approach that the Taliban are taking towards maybe trying to convince Mr. Trump that they spent too much money in Afghanistan and they should now maybe cut their losses and leave. What's your opinion, sir?
That is true, and I think you should also understand that, as you had also mentioned earlier, that Mr. Trump has been really looking for a solution which is somewhat different. And to be honest, I think, frankly, America is at a loss as to what sort of a policy it should pursue. And that is exactly the dilemma that America is facing today, as to what sort of a policy should we make. And that is why you find that it has taken that long for them to formulate a policy, and still it hasn't come out. So whilst they are making this policy, and the Taliban are very clever people, despite what they may be doing otherwise to give an impression that they are very backward, the fact remains that they know exactly the dilemma of the Americans as well. And they too have a dilemma, because they know that they cannot possibly rule Afghanistan. So I think these two dilemmas can find a solution if there is a certain element of sincerity on both sides. So it's a great moment, and this is exactly what Pakistan has been saying for years, that you have to ultimately come to some sort of a solution, because this is the reality. So it's also a moment of, although Pakistan should just stay away in that sense, because otherwise it will give a false, wrong signals. But the fact remains that Pakistan's position has been vindicated, as a consequence of what is happening in Afghanistan.
Well, if you also look at Mr. Trump's domestic problems, especially when we look at just what happened in Charlottesville, the white supremacist situation going on, and Mr. Trump not calling it out and saying that rather blaming both sides for the violence, is also not going down very well in the domestic sort of public opinion about Mr. Trump. So how do you think that we can reconcile with the fact that Mr. Trump would find any moral ground to withdraw from Afghanistan? Do you think that that's even a consideration? I don't think so.
Well, the domestic situation and the difficulties like the incident in Charlottesville that you pointed out adds the domestic dimension more forcefully to the American ability to stay overseas, not only continue the conflict of Afghanistan, but deploy more and more troops. For example, North Korea is on the brink.
Absolutely.
And the American relationship with Iran is now turning very, very sour to the point of confrontation.
Also China, sir. They're entering into a trade war with China.
So the Americans have too many wars on their hands, potential wars and actual wars on their hands, and the Americans do not have the means or do not have the finances. And I should also add that they do not have the resolve to fight the wars like Afghanistan anymore. So there is definitely a dilemma, and as Trump's domestic difficulties mount, there is going to be an increased pressure for him to pay more attention to the domestic issues and shrink the size of the American oversized military empire. So, but the question is that will Pentagon go along with that? Because James Mattis and McMaster and all these people still think that they have enough time with them in which they can cobble together a peace deal with the Afghans, which will lead to a sustainable peace. But in my judgment, the moment the Americans begin to show signs of withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Taliban are going to increase the level of their military activity, and it will look like more like Vietnam in 1973, 74, 75, when the South Vietnamese were no longer sure of the American support, and the Americans just left Vietnam, leading to the victory of the North Vietnamese. But then, in case of Afghanistan, there is one factor that I think will make it imperative for the Americans to retain the limited level of presence inside Afghanistan. That is that Afghanistan allows them the opportunity to look around what's happening in the region, and the region is on fire because you have not only the bad relationship between Pakistan and India, but the things between India and China are also hotting up. So there is no guarantee that if the Americans withdraw their presence from Afghanistan, so it will create another vacuum for them. And the Americans, in my judgment, are looking for their geopolitical and geostrategic, long-term strategic interests in which they would like to keep a watch on the region. And what is the better place than maintain a measure of military presence inside Afghanistan?
Absolutely, sir. Moving on, sir, what would be your advice in the light of the letter, General Saab, in the light of the letter that the Taliban wrote, what would be your advice to the Americans? What should they do?
Well, I don't think Americans will listen to my advice.
Well, we can still give it.
I mean, I know what you're saying. I'm just in a lighter way in saying that. But I think they should take this seriously. Obviously, they're not going to withdraw, as Professor Saab has said very rightly. And but the fact remains that this is an opportunity for dialogue. This is an opportunity for engagement. And there is no other option for them but to engage, because they cannot win militarily. And by adding troops, 5,000 or 10,000 or 8,000, it really will not make any qualitative difference, because after all, they had reached heights, those levels at 150,000, and with all that
military
might, and that morale was so high at that point of time, and the government was far more stable than what it is today. And in the present circumstances, all what can be done is to hold on to Afghanistan and to continue to sort of pressurize the Taliban and to say that you have to engage with us, and engage not on your terms, but on terms which are mutually acceptable. So I think this whole exercise at the moment is to draw Taliban into dialogue and to make them give concessions and not just say that, you withdraw or they will have to stay there because after all they have to invest and they have to also face the world. In case they withdraw from here, then, as it is, they are losing their, superiority and the fact that they were the only power, it was an exceptional power and so on. So all that is evaporating, in fact. So they have to also look at that. But at the same time, the economy of America, is one of the very major factors, and also the very mandate on which President Trump really, won his elections was something which means that he has to spend much less on conflicts. So, whereas he is now facing so many conflicts. So, I think these are some very serious dilemmas. And then we also have to look at our own position as to how, in these circumstances, what role can Pakistan play. I think the importance of Pakistan, to me, is getting more and more important because, firstly, the position that Pakistan had taken from its very inception, that this is a conflict which is of a political nature and needs political solutions, and it has no military solution can really solve it. And this is exactly what happened. We had been criticized, we had been condemned, but the fact remains that our position has been vindicated. And
And historically speaking also, sir, if we go back and we look at the justification that the Americans had for invading Afghanistan in the first place was Osama bin Laden, because they asked the Taliban to hand him over and they refused, so they invaded.
Osama had nothing to do with
Osama is no more in the picture. Now what justification do the Americans have?
None whatsoever. The Americans are being openly perceived, publicly perceived as an occupation force. And the Taliban are very right in demanding that whatever little justification you had in the previous years prior to Osama bin Laden getting killed has disappeared. So the Americans have no more ethical or moral justification for their continued presence in Afghanistan, especially when that conflict begins to get bloodier and bloodier, because ultimately it is the Afghan people who are suffering.
Absolutely.
So any kind of a peace or any kind of cessation in armed conflict, hostilities should be welcomed by the international community. But then the Americans are so used to having their ways that they are not willing to listen to reason, or Trump is rather insensitive to the cost of these ventures, which are getting impossible for the American economy to bear.
Absolutely, sir. We leave it at that, sir. Moving on, let's talk about something much closer to home. We've just celebrated our independence, 70 years of independence, sir, and a lot of gain, but not enough, I would say, that the kind of dreams that Pakistan was built on, that we still have a long way to actually reach them. And one of the main reasons, sir, for the disastrous situation that we are in is because of the Kashmir conflict, which has still not been resolved after 70 years. That's a long time, sir. General Talat, you were there, you saw everything with your own eyes. If you could tell us about that time, some anecdotal incidents that you recall, or anything that you'd like to share with us of that time period.
Well, actually, let me tell you that I'm one of those very fortunate people in that sense that I'm still alive, and I saw Pakistan in the making, and from the very first day, and obviously from its very conception in a sense. And you won't believe it, the type of expectations and the dreams that we had of Pakistan. So from those levels to what it is today. And I tell you without an iota of exaggeration that I saw Qaid-e-Azam from even closer than what you are standing. And the reason was that he came to Hyderabad, where I was born, Hyderabad, Dakhan. And he gave a talk, this was in 1946, just before partition. And my uncle was a minister in the government. And he said, would you like to, I was at that time, I think I was about 14, 15 years of age. And he said, would you like to sort of go to the Jalsa, I said, yeah, definitely, definitely, and there was so much of verve and excitement about it. So he made me sit on near his footsteps. So I saw him. Believe it or not, he spoke in English. Not one person probably was understanding what he was saying, but there were millions of people and there was total silence. This was the respect he commanded, because and the Muslims knew that there is something good that he has in mind, and there was so much of excitement. Then, of course,
expectations as well.
Yeah, the expectations were, which is very important, that the state would be able to sort of be firstly a homeland. There would be security. There will be also total sort of a lot of independence to carve your state in a way that you dream of it. But those, of course, has been shattered. And if, as somebody said yesterday, and I was watching the TV, and I also share with him, because this is also my own view, that Quaid-e-Azam would have been extremely disappointed,
seeing the Pakistan of today.
Say. But at the same time, as you rightly say, we should not lose our spirits, because we also faced some very, very challenging situations in these last 70 years. So it is not just our, we are not trying to place blame on others, but the fact remains that the regional situation and also the fact that the political parties and the political institutions, not only the political institutions, but all the state institutions in Pakistan, were in comparison to India and in comparison to other countries which were also getting their independence at that point of time, were much weaker. And also the standard of education, the standard of health, and also the fact that the British had ruled India and had neglected this region. I think all these factors were very important, which we never gave consideration. So I think we started off from a much weaker sort of a position than India when Pakistan came into being. But despite that, we have made progress, and I think even if we have lost some time, and even if we have made mistakes, we know exactly what mistakes we have made. We have a country now, and I think the loss we can gain in the next 70 years. So I am looking forward to that younger generation, although we won't, I won't be there, you would probably, but I think the next 70 years should be really the ones that we should cater for.
And sir, talking about that, do you think that in the next let's make it less, let's say about in the next 10 years or 20 years, any chance of Pakistan and India actually sitting down and talking about the real thorny issue of Kashmir? Dr. Riffat, in your opinion?
Well, if you look at the history of India-Pakistan's fluctuating relationship, there were times when both countries made a serious attempt to seek a resolution of all conflicts, including that of Kashmir. To begin with, you have the Liaquat-Nehru Pact. You have then in the early 60s, you have Bhutto and Swaran Singh talks. And then after the 1971 tragedy, there was a similar agreement, and nothing happened until 88. It's only the 1988, but 1989 when the Kashmiri uprising took place, which, by the way, instead of being stoked by Pakistan, there is ample historical evidence now to suggest that Kashmir uprising was indigenous in nature and Pakistan had nothing to do with it. And in fact, one could make a strong argument that Pakistan was as much surprised by the uprising, by the scale of the uprising, as was New Delhi. But then we got sucked into this, then it led to a series of crises between the two countries. But now the real difficulty is that the BJP, especially the Modi government, is not willing to pick up the threads of conversation which were broken off in early 2007 when there was a general expectation in Pakistan that President Manmohan Singh will come to Pakistan, and then of course the domestic situation in Pakistan unraveled that thought. So the Indians are not willing to come back to the negotiating table. But it will be entirely wrong to say that India-Pakistan have not engaged with each other on finding a resolution of the Kashmir dispute. And the current wave of violence in India has to subside, because the Indian security forces have to stop killing the Kashmiris and committing all kinds of brutalities against them, which have been thoroughly documented by human rights organizations. As long as they continue to shed the blood of the Kashmiris will continue to look towards Pakistan for diplomatic and moral support. And Pakistan cannot remain indifferent when their kith and kin across the border are, they are being killed so brutally and on such a massive scale. So I think that, and should we wait for Modi to pass away from the scene? But I think that in the last year or two of his rule, there is still some hope, because the international community is not willing to consider Kashmir as a nuclear flashpoint anymore. And that's exactly what the Indians are trying to turn the situation into.
Well, sir, talking about hindsight, sir, when we look at, in fact, you mentioned that you were born in Hyderabad. There is some kind of a similarity between the cases of Hyderabad and Kashmir, in the sense that we had the Nizam of Hyderabad, a Muslim ruler over a larger Hindu population, and in Kashmir we have the opposite, where we had the Hindu Raja on a large Muslim population. At the time, sir, Mr. Sardar Patel, I think it was Mr. Nehru's 2IC, who sent the forces in to annex Hyderabad and made sure that the Nizam could not accede to Pakistan, although he had every intention to do so. So he was forcibly prevented from acceding to Pakistan. Similarly, when Pakistan had the chance in 1948, they could have cut off the road that led to Kashmir between Delhi and Srinagar. But why wasn't that done, sir? Why wasn't that action completed so that we didn't have to deal with this problem today? Why wasn't Kashmir solved at that time and done similar action as the Indian Army had taken in Hyderabad? Why couldn't we have replicated that in Kashmir? And because we did try to do it, but it was, again, aborted in the middle of it. So if you could shed some light on those events, sir.
I think one thing you have to keep in mind is that the British previously had a plan to sort of leave in somewhere in 48 and not in 46 and 47, I mean. So they really advanced the plan, and in advancing the plan, I think they made a mess of it. And that is why you find all this, what has happened, and the type of...
Well, they sent Mr. Radcliffe to draw the borders, who had never been, anywhere near the subcontinent in all his life, and he was given 36 days to complete his job, which he did 3 days before his time was up.
Absolutely, and he had never visited this area. That is the worst part of it. He knew nothing about it. So I think the British did certain things which were, in a way, have proved to be so wrong in that sense, although the British are supposed to be very wise and so on.
And very moral. And have great, high, lofty moral values.
Moral values, but I think in the context of India, Pakistan, and particularly Pakistan and Kashmir in particular, I think they have been most unfair and unjust. As far as Hyderabad was concerned, there was no question. I think the Ittihad-e-Muslimin of Hyderabad, they made a mess of it, and the Nizam did not have the foresight to understand the implications of what he was doing. He should have had some sort of an arrangement with the Indians, because it is a landlocked state, and there was no question of it being either independent or joining Pakistan, and it sought independence, which was ridiculous. So I think things again also didn't work well for the Muslims in there, because there were thousands of Muslims who were brutally murdered. They say at least 60 to 70,000, and mostly in the rural areas, And so I'm witness to all that, what had happened. And then what I see is, now it's really the future that we have to look to. And the future can only change if the leadership in India understands that there is no way, and the type of policies that they are pursuing are only going to make things more difficult. And Mr. Modi was thinking that he will be able to isolate Pakistan, he will be able to pressurize Pakistan. He was thinking that the international community is so supportive of him that they will just, ignore Pakistan. I think all that has gone by the board. And you know that Pakistan cannot possibly be isolated. Pakistan has some very strong friends. It has China, it has Russia, it has Saudi Arabia, it has most of the Muslim countries, and even France and
Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey. I mean, it's just not possible. 200 million people, and its location and all that. So that is all bunk, the fact to isolate Pakistan. The thing is that it is also in India's interest, and it will also show that India is a country which has a future. Because if you have a leadership which is trying to conduct itself in such a way that it cannot even have good relations with its neighbors, then what sort of ambition do you have? So I think these are some central questions that need to be answered. And just to think that and also to sort of undermine our relationship with China by and also trying to sort of place yourself in Afghanistan to do harm to Pakistan and try to sort of win over Afghanistan so that they can oppose Pakistan. These are not policies which will do any good to the region or to India itself. Because if India really wants a place in Afghanistan and in Central Asia, it needs peace there. And to have peace, you need Pakistan.
Absolutely.
And you
in order to get to Afghanistan, they need to pass through Pakistan, and they should have good relations with us. If they intend
so what
to
you
do that.
need is a fundamental change in your outlook and in policies. But can that fundamental change take place with Modi in power? The speech of his gave some insight as to what he is thinking, and probably there are reflections in India at the moment that this present policy is not working and it needs a change. Pakistan is very amenable. Pakistan has been extremely gone out of its way. Now, as far as it's complained that you have these Haqqani network and this, that, and the other, that is no more working. It doesn't work anymore. Because the fact is that the reality in Afghanistan is very different to what was there years ago. So I think both Americans, both Indians, everyone needs to sort of reassess and relook at the policies of the region, and especially the relationship with Pakistan. And I'm glad, and I'm not saying it just as an optimist, but truly I think that Pakistan's position in many areas has been vindicated, and we need to sort of don't have to really push anyone. They will see for themselves that what Pakistan has been saying has a lot of merit in it.
And Dr. Riffat, do you think that if we were to seriously address the Kashmir issue, would also have repercussions all the way across the region and into Afghanistan? Because I personally believe that if Kashmir is solved, then 90% of the issues of the region would be solved, and that would have a good positive effect, spreading out towards the entire region and having a more peaceful sort of an environment that can be created. Do you think that that's the case, sir, or no?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a 2K theory. Peace in Kashmir.
Peace in Kabul.
Peace in Kabul. The two are so entirely linked, so organically linked, because we are talking about the same region. It's the same conflict formation which spreads from Kashmir all the way to Kabul and goes all the way to Central Asia. So the resolution of the Kashmir problem is the key. But the key is in the hands of the Indians, because the Indians think that they are pursuing a policy which is strategically smart and is also tactically bright. But it's neither strategically smart nor is it tactically bright, because the more they pursue this policy, the greater is going to be
resistance.
The resistance. And the lesson of the 21st century is you cannot keep people enslaved for a very long period of time. You cannot keep under your colonial thumb for a very long period of time. And that is true. And what we need in Kashmir is a just peace in which Kashmiris are the key stakeholders along with India and Pakistan. And I'm sure if India were to return to the dialogue table, and if it were to take Kashmiris' grievances very seriously, then a formula can be devised, a formula can be found in which the accommodation, the interests of all the three parties can be accommodated. And Musharraf had 4-point formula, but that was the beginning. maybe the time was not right for that, but you know, but the prerequisite, the sine qua non remains the India's willingness to entertain Kashmiris as a serious case and treat them with respect and respect their right to self-determination. As long as those parameters are observed by the three parties, I think that, you know, the finding a solution to Kashmir problem is not really that difficult. Probably, perhaps the key lies in the Indian willingness and sincerity to negotiate a peace with Pakistan and with the Kashmiris.
Serious political will is required, sir, on all sides, absolutely. But let's talk about the situation of the Kashmiris, General Saab. 70 years on, they are still being blinded by pellet guns. Women are being raped. Children are being killed in the streets. Little girls are picking up stones, hurling them at these military personnel. So the rest of the world has been looking at what's been going on in Kashmir, and we always have this this justification given that India is a huge market, and therefore, you know, the powers that be, the G5 or the G20 or all those sitting in the United Nations are not acting on the resolutions that were passed within them. So this sort of apathy and complete hands-off approach by the international community on this issue is really puzzling for me, sir. Why do you think that, or rather, what do you think we can do in order to push this matter further in the international fora?
Well, I think you are very right, and it's so unfortunate that expediency has really been the policy of all these major powers, and especially Americas. They don't want to say anything, although they know exactly what is happening in Kashmir. And but they don't want to take a moral stand. They don't want to antagonize India. They think that, as you said very rightly, that it has a huge market and so on, and also strategically it is aligned with us, hell with these people. You see, the thing is that there are two factors. One is this, what we have just said. The other is that the insurgency in Kashmir is not hurting the Americans in any way. You know, the way, and they also think that the Muslim insurgencies should not be encouraged, because they have this wrong concept that insurgency or this, it's not truly an insurgency as much as it's a movement in Kashmir against the Indian hegemony. And they have equated it to some sort of that it is like supporting the Taliban, or it's supporting Al-Qaeda, or supporting this, which is completely wrong, which is 100% wrong. But that is what is the impression. And so these are the several factors which also are preventing the Western world, the Americans, even the Russians and the Chinese from not taking a very strong position as far as, trying to sympathize with the Kashmiris. You don't even find the Russians also saying anything about it, nor even the Chinese. You know, let's be honest about it. And there are reasons for that. And we understand that. But a time has come when the international community cannot ignore it anymore. But I have a feeling, and I would like Dr. Riffat to also give his views on that. I feel that eventually it is the people of India which are going to should pressurize the Indian government in order to change things in Kashmir. Because if India truly stands for democracy, if it is truly secular, if it truly goes by the words and the commitments that it made to the people of Kashmir, and if it considers at least a certain part of Kashmir as its own, then it has serious obligations.
And these are all big ifs, sir.
Big ifs. But you know, the ifs are there all over. Internationally also there
Absolutely,
are ifs.
sir.
But these ifs are more important than those ifs.
Absolutely, sir.
In response to the query raised by Talat Masood, I think there was a very important book written in the early 80s by Sumantra Bose, in which the title of the book was that the denial of justice, freedom and self-determination in Kashmir. In that book he had documented not only the statements made by the successive Indian leadership promising to respect the right to self-determination of the Kashmiris, but he had also documented the systematic violations of their basic and their fundamental human rights. So the survival of democracy in India would ultimately depend whether the Kashmiris are also accorded the same rights. If, for the sake of the argument, if one accepts the Indian argument that Kashmiris are their citizens, how would India justify the treatment, the brutal suppression of their fundamental rights if it treats them as their citizens? The two are not compatible. So you cannot have, the logic of democracy operating in rest of India while that is denied to the Kashmiris.
Sir, another thing that came to mind when General Saab was talking, he mentioned about the international community. But recently, sir, there have been attempts by China, by the US and others, even Russia, to talk about the Kashmir issue, to try to,
What they are saying is that you should talk.
Absolutely, sir. But all those efforts by the US, by the China, by the Russians have been shot down by the Indians. The Indians have simply refused to even entertain the thought of talking about Kashmir and trying to resolve the issue. Now, having seen this kind of a belligerent attitude by the Indians, what kind of impressions would be generated in those powers, for example, the European Union, China, Russia, the US, having seen the kind of attitude that is being constantly presented by the Indians, don't you think there is a time when the line has to be drawn and you say, okay, enough is enough? When do you think that line will come?
No, I don't see that line because you see, it doesn't hurt them. Let's be very realistic about it. The fact remains is that they would be wanting a diplomatic solution because it doesn't suit them also that India and Pakistan should be at loggerheads. They want peace in this region. All these countries are not interested that India and Pakistan should be at loggerheads and should have so much of tension.
Do you think so, sir? Because what it seems on the face of it, it seems that it's the complete opposite.
There is a difference. There is a difference. They may not be going all out, or for that matter, they're not even taking interest as far as the Kashmir problem is concerned. But they also do not want the relations between India and Pakistan to reach a point where it can get dangerous because of the nuclear factor, because of their strategic interests in the region, and so on and so forth. So I think there are several considerations which come into play while dealing with India and Pakistan, and the same also are reflected in how they look at the problem of Kashmir. You see, we have to also be very realistic about it. As far as Kashmir is concerned, it's not hurting them. That is very, although I mean it's a matter that you very rightly have pointed out, and I think how many times the PTV and all other channels in Pakistan has been echoing that all over the world. We sent, I think, a delegation to, I don't know, 22 countries and all the important countries of the world. We bring it at every forum. We remind the United Nations.
But it seems that the Indian propaganda is far stronger or better than ours.
Well, I think it's not just the propaganda. It's the the strategic interests of the major powers that is more important, and that is how India plays that game. And if the strategic interests were not there, I tell you, it would have been a very different, as we have seen in the case of so many other disputed territories. Look at Palestine. Look at the way that Palestine has been handled. I mean, to me, it is such a shame. So I think these two major areas, Kashmir and Palestine, the ones in which the world, and especially the Western world, is not interested, they seem to be completely neglected and ignored, and their people are humiliated, their people are arrested, their people don't have jobs, and in every way they are being exploited, not only by Indians and by the Israelis, but by the international community as well.
Very sad remarks.
One thing that I would like to add, which is a counterintuitive thought. It took slavery to be delegitimized almost 300 years.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're still suffering the after effects.
But
the hangover
by
continues.
But by and large, slavery has disappeared. Slavery has become such a moral stigma now that anybody who claims that he owns slaves, whether it is domestic slavery, in other forms it does exist, but by and large slavery has been discredited. Number one. Number two, it took almost 1 century to delegitimize the colonial struggles, the phenomenon of colonialism.
Absolutely.
So taking a cue from that, I hope that we wouldn't have to wait for another 200 years or 100 more years for the Kashmiris to find their freedom or their expression to right to self-determination. But Kashmiris, India's moral and ethical hold on Kashmir is getting weaker by the day. Even though militarily, politically, economically, we may find India to be an insurgent or a resurgent power, but their ethical and moral authority to hold Kashmiris in bondage is getting weaker by the day.
Very well said, sir, and we'll leave it at that. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and being on the show. Well, you heard the conversation, and in conclusion, we'd like to say that the only way forward for both India and Pakistan, and especially for the Kashmiris, is to sit down and find a workable solution for the peace of our generations to come. With that hope and on that note, it's goodbye.